The morning sun rose over New Haven like it had every day for the past 20 years. The amber wheat fields stretched for hundreds of miles across the valley, swaying gently in the warm breeze. Children played in the streets of the main settlement while their parents worked in the fields or tended to the livestock. This was a peaceful world, far from Earth, far from any conflict. The colonists had come here to build a new life, to farm, to raise families, to live in harmony with the land. Captain Doyen stood on the bridge of his patrol ship, the Morning Star, watching the planet below. His garrison was small, just 12 vessels designed for basic defense against pirates or smugglers. Nothing more was needed. New Haven had no enemies. The colony exported grain and vegetables to nearby systems. They had never fired a weapon in anger. Doyen himself had joined the Colonial Defense Force because the pay was steady and the work was easy. He spent most of his days running drills that everyone knew would never be needed. His second officer, Lieutenant Hyojin, was at her station reviewing the morning reports when the alarms began to scream. Her fingers flew across the console, her face going pale. "Captain, we have multiple contacts entering the system. Hundreds of them. They just appeared on long-range scanners." Doyen felt his stomach drop. "Identify them." "Working on it," Hyojin said, her voice tight. The main screen flickered to life, showing a massive fleet of ships approaching at high speed. They were unlike anything in the colonial database. Sharp angular vessels painted in dark green and black. Weapon ports bristled along their hulls. "Sir, these are Vrelian warships. I count 300 vessels. They're heading directly for us. 300 warships against 12 patrol boats." Doyen knew immediately that this was no mistake, no accident. This was an invasion force. He hit the emergency channel. "All ships, battle stations. Civilian evacuation protocols. Send a priority distress signal to Earth immediately." On the planet below, alarms began to sound in every settlement. People looked up at the sky in confusion. Many had never heard these alarms before. Parents grabbed their children. Farmers abandoned their equipment and ran for the shelters. But there were 2.3 million people on New Haven, and the evacuation ships could only hold a fraction of them. The Vrelian fleet came to a stop in high orbit, surrounding the planet completely. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The face that appeared on screen was reptilian, with green scales and cold yellow eyes. This was Supreme Commander Vrek of the Vrelian Dominion. His voice was harsh, clicking with each syllable. "Human colonists of this world, you are in violation of Vrelian territorial claims. This system has been designated for our expansion. You have 2 hours to evacuate your population and leave this planet. After that time, we will consider all remaining humans as hostile occupiers and act accordingly." Doyen's hands clenched into fists. 2 hours. It would take 2 days just to load the evacuation ships, and they only had capacity for maybe 10,000 people. This wasn't an evacuation order. This was an execution notice disguised as diplomacy. He opened a channel to the Vrelian commander. "Supreme Commander Vrek, I am Captain Doyen of the New Haven Colonial Defense Force. This colony has been here for 20 years. We have documented claims filed with the Galactic Council. We have children here, families, elderly people. We cannot evacuate in 2 hours. We request negotiation. We can share this system. There is room for both our peoples." Vrek's face showed no emotion. "Your claims mean nothing. Your presence here is an insult to the Dominion. 2 hours. The time begins now." The channel cut off. Doyen looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were terrified. They were Defense Force officers who had never expected to face real combat. "Hyojin, status on that distress signal?" "Sent, sir. Full tactical data, enemy fleet composition, everything. If anyone receives it, they'll know exactly what happened here." Hyojin's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she worked. Doyen made the hardest decision of his life. He knew his 12 ships couldn't win, but they could buy time. Every minute they held off, the Vrelians, was another minute for the evacuation ships to load more civilians. He opened the channel to his small fleet. "All ships form defensive positions around the evacuation zones. We're going to hold them as long as we can." The patrol ships moved into position, their small weapons charging up. On the ground, the evacuation was chaos. Thousands of people crowded around the spaceports, desperately trying to get aboard the ships. Parents pushed their children forward, begging the crew to take them. The evacuation ship captains made impossible choices, packing people beyond safe capacity, leaving others behind. The 2 hours passed like minutes. When the deadline expired, Vrek gave the order without hesitation. The Vrelian fleet opened fire. Massive energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking the major settlements first. Entire cities vanished in seconds, turned to vapor by weapons designed to destroy military installations. The heat was so intense that the sand turned to glass. The pressure waves flattened everything for miles around each impact point. Doyen's fleet engaged the Vrelian ships, their small weapons barely scratching the shields of the massive warships. The Morning Star fired everything it had, targeting the nearest Vrelian cruiser. The enemy shields absorbed the hits without even flickering. Return fire came immediately. A plasma beam cut through the Morning Star's hull like paper. Doyen had just enough time to see the breach alarms flash red before the ship's atmosphere vented into space. One by one, the patrol ships were destroyed. They fought bravely, buying perhaps 20 extra minutes. In that time, 3 evacuation ships managed to launch, carrying maybe 30,000 people away from the planet. It was a tiny fraction of the population, but it was something. Hyejin had stayed at her station even as the ship came apart around her. She worked frantically, updating the distress signal with real-time data of the attack, the faces of the Vrelian commanders, the weapon signatures, the tactical formations, everything that might help someone, someday, understand what happened here and who was responsible. She hit the final transmission button just as the communications array exploded. The signal went out into the void, traveling at the speed of light toward Earth. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. The Vrelians were thorough. Every settlement, every farm, every shelter was targeted and destroyed. They used scanners to detect life signs underground and sent bunker-buster weapons to eliminate them. By the time they were finished, the beautiful amber wheat fields were gone. The rivers had boiled away. The air itself was burning. When the shooting stopped, 2.3 million people were dead. The 3 evacuation ships that escaped carried survivors who would never forget what they saw. Parents without children, children without parents, families torn apart in the chaos. They carried the trauma of watching their world die from the viewports as they fled. The Vrelian fleet landed occupation forces on what remained of New Haven. They began setting up their own colony infrastructure. Building on the ashes of human civilization, Supreme Commander Vrek sent his report to the Vrelian High Council. He stated that the human outer colonies were weak and poorly defended. He recommended continued expansion into human space. He believed this would be remembered as the first step in the Dominion's glorious expansion. He was right that it would be remembered. But not the way he imagined. 48 hours after the attack, the distress signal reached Earth. It had traveled across dozens of star systems, bouncing through relay stations until it finally arrived at Earth Defense Command headquarters. A junior officer received it first, watched the footage, and immediately escalated it to his commander. Within 30 minutes, it was on the desk of Admiral Jaiwan, Supreme Commander of Earth's United Fleet. Jaiwan watched the entire transmission in silence. She saw the peaceful colony. She saw the Vrelian ultimatum. She saw the brief, hopeless defense. She saw the bombardment. She saw cities full of civilians turn to ash. When the footage ended, she sat in silence for a full minute, her face carved from stone. Then she picked up her communication device and made 3 calls. The first was to the civilian government. The second was to the military production facilities on Mars, Europa, and Titan. The third was to the classified deep space stations that most people didn't know existed. Each call contained the same message. Activate Protocol Midnight Requiem. Total remobilization. New Haven has fallen. 2.3 million dead. We are going to war. The government met in emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Earth had not fought a major war in over a century. Humanity had spread across the stars peacefully, trading with other species, avoiding conflicts. But there were lines that could not be crossed. The deliberate massacre of an entire civilian colony was beyond any line. This was genocide. This required a response that would echo through history. Admiral Jiwan began the mobilization immediately. Messages went out across all human worlds. Military reserves were activated. Shipyards went to full production. And from hidden places across human space, from secret bases and classified facilities, the true strength of Earth's military began to emerge. The mobilization began within hours of the government's vote. Across Earth, Mars, Europa, Titan, and 50 other human worlds, Military installations that had been quiet for decades suddenly roared to life. Factories that produced civilian goods switched to weapons manufacturing. Shipyards that built cargo vessels began assembling warships. The entire human civilization shifted into a war posture that shocked even those who lived among them. Admiral Jiwan stood in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the reports flow in on massive displays. Each screen showed a different location, a different fleet assembly point. From Earth's moon, 100 massive dreadnoughts were being pulled from sealed hangars built into the lunar surface. From the asteroid belt beyond Mars, carrier groups were emerging from hidden bases that had been disguised as mining operations. From the clouds of Jupiter, whole fleets rose up from facilities that had supposedly been abandoned decades ago. "How many do we have?" asked General Kwan, the army commander who had come to observe the naval preparations. His voice carried a mix of awe and horror. "Current count is approaching 700,000 warships," Jiwan replied calmly. "We'll have them all assembled within 72 hours. Kwan stared at her. 700,000, I knew we had reserves, but this? How did we build this without anyone knowing? We didn't hide it from our own people, Jiwan said. The construction was public. The bases were documented. We just never activated them all at once. Humanity has been at peace for a long time, but we remembered the wars before the peace. We built this fleet slowly, quietly over 100 years. We hoped we'd never need it." She turned to look at him directly. "New Haven proved we were right to prepare. The galaxy isn't safe. Peace only lasts as long as everyone respects each other. The Vrelians didn't respect us. They thought we were weak. They're about to learn differently." Across human space, the call had gone out. Every military member on reserve duty reported back. Veterans who hadn't worn a uniform in years found their old equipment waiting for them. Young officers who had trained in academies but never seen real combat suddenly realized their education was about to be tested. The response was total. Humanity was going to war. Captain Minho reported to his new assignment at the Mars shipyards. He had been commanding a cargo vessel when the mobilization order came through. Now he stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Righteous Fury, a vessel so large that it had its own internal city to house the crew of 10,000. The ship was one of 50,000 dreadnoughts, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Minho had volunteered for the front-line assignment. His sister had lived on New Haven. She had been a teacher at one of the colony schools. She had sent him a message just days before the attack, talking about her students, about how proud she was of their progress. Now she was gone, vaporized with 2.3 million others. He touched the locket around his neck that held her picture. This mission was personal. Commander Subin was preparing her fighter wing on the carrier Defiant Sky. She had 300 pilots under her command, each one flying the newest model of strike fighter that had been in development for the past decade. These weren't the light patrol fighters that had tried to defend New Haven. These were weapons of war, equipped with shields, heavy missiles, and energy weapons that could punch through capital ship armor. Sobin gathered her pilots in the briefing room. They were young, most of them, and excited. They had trained for years but never fought a real battle. She needed them to understand what they were about to face. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice cutting through their chatter. "We are going to kill people. Not soldiers, not warriors, but people. The Vrelians have families. They have homes. When we attack their ships, we will be ending lives. I need you to understand that and accept it, because if you hesitate out there, you will die, and so will the pilots next to you." The room went silent. One young pilot raised his hand. "Commander, they killed civilians. They murdered children. Do they deserve mercy?" Subin considered the question. "No, they don't deserve mercy. But we're not doing this for them. We're doing this for us. We're going to fight this war cleanly, efficiently, and we're going to win. And when it's over, we're going to have to live with what we've done. So do your job, follow orders, and come home alive. That's all I ask." Lieutenant Taehyung was assigned to Admiral Jiwan's staff as a tactical planning officer. At 24 years old, he was the youngest officer at such a high level, but his test scores and strategic simulations had been the highest in military academy history. Now he sat in a room with senior admirals, planning the largest military operation humanity had ever attempted. "The Vrelian Dominion controls 43 star systems," Taehyung explained, pointing to the holographic display. "Their fleet of 80,000 warships is spread across these systems for defense. If we attack directly, we'll face their full strength. Instead, I propose we use our numerical advantage differently. He manipulated the display, showing the fleet dividing into 70 separate battle groups. We split our 700,000 ships into groups of 10,000 each. We hit every major Vrelian world simultaneously. They'll be forced to defend everywhere at once, which means they'll be outnumbered at every battle. We won't give them time to consolidate or retreat. Admiral G1 studied the plan. This requires perfect timing and coordination across dozens of light years. If even one group is delayed, the Vrelians might realize what we're doing and concentrate their forces. Yes, Admiral, but our jump drive technology is better than theirs. We can coordinate through quantum communication relays. It can work. Taehyung's confidence was absolute. Ji-won nodded slowly. Approve the plan. Begin coordination with all battle group commanders. Dr. Yuna worked in a classified facility deep beneath Europa's ice sheet. She was the lead scientist on several experimental weapon projects that had been in development for years. With the mobilization order, her projects had been fast-tracked to deployment status. Now she was overseeing the installation of these weapons on the fleet. The first was called Kronos missiles. They created localized time distortions, causing matter within the field to experience time at a vastly accelerated rate. A ship hit by a Kronos missile would age years in seconds, its hull corroding and failing from centuries of wear in moments. It was a horrible weapon, and Yuna had argued against its development. But now, looking at the footage from New Haven, she understood why it existed. The second system was quantum jammers that prevented enemy jump drives from activating. Any Vrelian ship trying to escape a battle would find itself trapped, unable to flee. And the third was neural disruptors, which sent signals that interfered with Vrelian brain chemistry, causing confusion and incapacitation. Yuna watched as the weapons were loaded onto the ships. She felt sick. These were technologies that violated several galactic treaties, but the Vrelians had violated something worse. They had violated the fundamental rule of civilization: don't massacre innocents, and now they would face weapons they couldn't imagine. The fleet assembled at Rally Point Omega, a point in deep space far from any inhabited system. 700,000 warships came together in a formation so massive that it took hours just to fly from one end to the other. The crews watched in awe as ships continued to arrive. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, carriers holding thousands of fighters, cruisers bristling with weapons, destroyers moving in wolf packs, and support vessels carrying enough ammunition and supplies to sustain a war for years. Ambassador Chaewon stood before the Galactic Council, the diplomatic assembly where 200 species met, to discuss interstellar politics. The chamber was in chaos. Every species had heard about the human fleet assembling. Several ambassadors were demanding that Earth stand down, that they seek diplomatic solutions, that this show of force was destabilizing the galaxy. Chaewon waited for the noise to die down. Then she spoke, her voice calm and cold. The Vrelian Dominion attacked a peaceful human colony. They gave civilians 2 hours to evacuate a population of 2.3 million. They then systematically murdered every man, woman, and child on that world. This was not an act of war. This was genocide. She looked around the chamber. Earth's response is not negotiable. We are not interested in mediation. We are not interested in sanctions or diplomatic protests. We are going to the Vrelian homeworlds, and we are going to end their ability to threaten anyone ever again. Every species in this chamber should understand. Humanity protects its own. Touch our civilians and there will be no mercy, no negotiation, only justice. An ambassador from the peaceful Taurian Republic stood. But 700,000 warships? This is madness. The Vrelians made a mistake, but this response will devastate their entire civilization. Yes, Chaewon said simply. It will. Let that be a lesson to everyone. Humanity has lived peacefully among you for over a century. We have traded fairly, negotiated honestly, and resolved disputes diplomatically. We chose peace. The Vrelians have shown us that peace is not enough. They will pay the price for that lesson, and every species watching will remember it. She sat down. The chamber was silent. Several ambassadors began drafting messages to their governments, warning them to stay far away from human space. Senior Admiral Krelt stood in the command center of the Vrelian military headquarters, staring at the display showing the approaching human fleet. The numbers were impossible. The Vrelian scout ships had confirmed it 3 times. 700,000 warships were traveling through space toward Vrelian territory. The formation was so large that their sensors could barely track all of it. Each time the humans jumped to a new system, the gravitational disturbance was measurable from light years away. How long until they arrive? Krelt asked his tactical officer. If they maintain current speed, they will reach our border worlds in 14 days, sir. But our analysis suggests they may bypass the border entirely. Their jump technology appears more advanced than we realized. They could appear anywhere. Krelt felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The Vrelian Dominion had ruled this region of space for 300 years. They had conquered 12 other species. Their fleet was feared across dozens of star systems. But this was different. The humans weren't sending a punitive expedition. They were sending an extermination force. He turned to his communications officer. Get me a direct channel to the human fleet commander. Maximum priority. Use every frequency we have. Supreme Commander Vrek, still on the occupied colony world, was reviewing plans to build a new Vrelian settlement when his guards came to arrest him. He looked up in confusion as they entered his command center, weapons drawn. What is the meaning of this? Orders from High Council, sir. You are to be detained pending investigation into your handling of the human colony situation. The guard commander looked uncomfortable. He had served under Vrek for years. This is ridiculous, Vrek hissed. I followed standard occupation protocols. The humans were in violation of our territorial claims. I gave them time to evacuate. They refused. This is a political move by the Council to save themselves. Sir, please come with us. The human fleet is approaching. The Council wants you secured as a potential bargaining chip. Vrek finally understood. The High Council was panicking. They were going to try to trade him to the humans, offer him up as a sacrifice to save themselves. He wanted to fight, to resist, but he saw the weapons pointed at him and knew it was useless. As they led him to a cell on the military station orbiting the planet, he consoled himself with the certainty that his political connections would protect him. The Council couldn't actually hand him over. His family was too powerful. He had no idea how little power would matter in the coming days. Admiral Krelt's communication request reached the human fleet after several hours. The transmission was picked up by the flagship Eternal Vigil, Admiral Jiwan's command ship. Lieutenant Borum, the communications officer, reviewed the message and brought it immediately to the Admiral. Jiwan listened to Krelt's message in silence. The Vrelian Admiral spoke carefully, his translator rendering his clicking speech into human language. He offered reparations. He offered territory. He offered trade agreements and diplomatic concessions. He offered the arrest and trial of Vrek. He offered anything and everything to avoid the coming conflict. When the message ended, Jiwan stood. Open a channel. I will respond personally. Borum activated the communication system. The channel opened and Krelt's face appeared on screen. His reptilian features showed strain. Behind him, Vrelian officers worked frantically at their stations, clearly preparing for battle. Admiral Krelt, Jiwan said, her voice flat and emotionless. I received your offer. Admiral Jiwan, please, we can resolve this diplomatically. The death of your colonist was a tragic mistake. Supreme Commander Vrek exceeded his authority. The High Council had no knowledge of his intentions. We will punish those responsible. We will pay any price you demand. Please call off your fleet. Jiwan's face could have been carved from stone. You call it a tragic mistake. Let me tell you what a tragic mistake is. A tragic mistake is a weapons malfunction that accidentally kills civilians. A tragic mistake is a miscommunication during a battle that results in collateral damage. What you did was not a mistake, she leaned forward. You sent 300 warships to a farming colony. You gave 2.3 million people 2 hours to evacuate. You knew it was impossible. You then spent 6 hours systematically murdering every man, woman, and child on that planet. You hunted them down in their shelters. You destroyed evacuation ships trying to flee. You killed farmers, teachers, children, elderly people who had never hurt anyone. Krelt started to speak, but Jiwan cut him off. You made a choice. You chose to believe that humanity was weak. You chose to test whether we would fight back. You chose to murder innocents to take their land. Now you face the consequences of your choices. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. You will burn, she cut the transmission. The bridge was silent. Lieutenant Borum looked at her admiral with something like fear. She had never heard such cold rage in a human voice. Around the bridge, other officers returned to their work quietly. They all understood. This war would not end until the Vrelians were broken beyond repair. Krelt stared at the blank screen where Jiwan's face had been. He had negotiated with dozens of species over his long career. He had seen anger, rage, demands for revenge. But he had never seen anything like the cold certainty in the human admiral's eyes. She wasn't angry. She was simply stating facts. The Vrelians would burn. Not might burn. Would burn. It was already decided. He turned to his staff. Begin emergency evacuation of all border worlds. Civilian populations to be moved to the core systems. Military forces to establish defensive positions around the homeworlds. Activate all reserves. We fight for survival now. The evacuation orders went out across 17 Vrelian border worlds. Panic spread immediately. Billions of Vrelians tried to flee at once. The transportation system couldn't handle the load. Ships departed overcrowded and understocked. Families were separated in the chaos. Some worlds, further from the core, realized they couldn't evacuate everyone in time. Local governors had to make horrible choices about who would get space on the transports and who would be left behind. On the occupied colony, now called Vrel Prime, the Vrelian settlers who had just arrived were ordered to leave immediately. They had been there less than a week, had just begun setting up their new homes. Now they were being told that a human fleet was coming and that this world would be a battlefield. The colony commander organized a frantic evacuation, but they only had so many transport ships. The Taurian Republic, humanity's oldest allies, sent a diplomatic mission to the human fleet. Ambassador Delora of the Taurians was a respected figure who had negotiated peace agreements across the galaxy. Her ship was granted permission to approach the Eternal Vigil. She was brought aboard and escorted to meet with Admiral Jiwon. Admiral, I come as a friend to both humanity and the Vrelian people, Delora began. The Taurian Republic condemns what happened at New Haven. It was a crime against civilization. But I beg you to consider a diplomatic solution. The Vrelian government is willing to meet your demands. Why bring destruction to billions of innocents? Jiwon gestured to a chair. Sit, Ambassador. I respect the Taurian Republic and your history of peacekeeping, so I will explain our position clearly. The Vrelians did not just kill our people. They demonstrated a belief that they could attack human civilians without consequence. If we negotiate now, if we accept reparations and trials and promises, what message does that send to the galaxy? She pulled up a star map. There are 200 species in the Galactic Council. Most are peaceful. But some, like the Kresh hegemony, are expansionist. They watch what happens here. If humanity accepts an apology and some concessions for genocide, they will know we are weak. They will know they can test us. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 10 years, but eventually, another species will look at a human colony and think they can take it without real consequences. Delora listened carefully. She understood the logic but feared the cost. So you will destroy the Vrelians to send a message to the galaxy? We will destroy the Vrelian military to ensure this never happens again, Jiwon corrected. Their civilians will survive if they do not resist, but their ability to threaten anyone will end. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity will not accept the murder of innocents. Not ever. Not for any reason. The ambassador left without achieving her goal. She reported back to the Taurian government that the human fleet would not stop. The Taurians made the decision to stay neutral, but offered to send hospital ships to help with casualties on both sides. It was the most they could do. The Kresh hegemony, watching from their territory, made their own calculations. They had been planning to expand into several systems near human space. Those plans were immediately canceled. The Kresh military command reviewed the human fleet composition and realized that if the humans wanted to, they could crush the Kresh hegemony in a matter of weeks. The Kresh immediately sent diplomatic envoys to Earth offering non-aggression pacts and trade agreements. Other species throughout the galaxy reacted similarly. The peaceful ones expressed horror at the scale of the human response but took no action. The militaristic ones quietly backed away from any aggressive plans near human territory. Everyone understood that something fundamental had changed. The hour passed in chaos on the surface of New Haven. The Vrelian settlers, who had only been there for days, scrambled to board any available transport ship. The military garrison began evacuating as well, loading their equipment and personnel as quickly as possible. Some argued they should fight, that they should make the humans pay for every meter of ground. Their commanders ordered them to evacuate. No one wanted to die on this cursed world. The orbital station where Rek was being held transmitted a message requesting additional time to complete evacuation. Lieutenant Borum received the transmission and brought it to Admiral Jiwan. She read it without expression. Denied, they have their hour. Not 1 second more. When the deadline expired, Admiral Jiwan gave the order that would begin the war. All ships, fire. The orbital station vanished first. 1,000 dreadnoughts targeted it simultaneously. Their main guns fired as one, massive beams of concentrated energy that converged on the station. The defensive shields, designed to withstand normal combat, lasted less than a second under the combined assault. The station came apart in a flash of light so bright it could be seen from the planet's surface. Every Vrelian on board died instantly, including Supreme Commander Vrek. He didn't even have time to understand what was happening. One moment he was in his cell, the next he simply ceased to exist. Captain Minho, commanding the Righteous Fury, watched the station's destruction with grim satisfaction. His sister's face flashed in his mind. This was for her, for all of them. He targeted the nearest Vrelian facility on the surface, a military command center that had been built on top of what was once a human school. Main batteries fire. The dreadnought's weapons lanced down through the atmosphere. The Vrelian command center and everything within a kilometer of it vanished into a crater. Around the planet, other human ships began their systematic bombardment. But this was different from what the Vrelians had done. The human targeting was precise. They hit military installations. They destroyed the new Vrelian colonial infrastructure. They eliminated anything the Vrelians had built on the planet. But they avoided the areas where the original human settlements had stood. Those places remained untouched, marked as memorial sites. When the bombardment ended 6 hours later, every Vrelian structure was gone. The planet's surface was scarred, but the land itself survived. The rivers still flowed. The atmosphere was still breathable. This world could be rebuilt. Minho broadcast from the Righteous Fury on all frequencies. This world was called New Haven. 2.3 million humans lived here in peace until the Vrelian Dominion murdered them. This soil is now and forever human territory, consecrated by the blood of innocents. Let it be known to the galaxy. We have reclaimed our dead. The human fleet then split into 70 battle groups, just as Lieutenant Taehyung had planned. Each group consisted of 10,000 warships. They dispersed toward different Vrelian systems simultaneously, jumping away in perfect coordination. The Vrelian observers watching from the core worlds realized with horror what was happening. The humans weren't going to fight one big battle. They were going to attack everywhere at once. Admiral Krelt watched the tactical display as red markers appeared across Vrelian space. Every major world, every military installation, every fleet base was being targeted simultaneously. His 80,000 ships were spread across 6 core systems. Each system now faced at least one human battle group of 10,000 ships. The math was brutal. Even if every Vrelian ship fought perfectly, they were outnumbered 10 to 1 in every engagement. Sound general quarters, Krelt ordered. All ships prepare for combat. Send word to the High Council. We fight for our survival. At Vrelios Prime, the Vrelian homeworld, the defense fleet consisted of 15,000 warships, the strongest concentration in Vrelian space. Commander Subin's carrier group was part of the human force assigned to this system. Her battle group of 10,000 ships emerged from jump space in attack formation. The Vrelian fleet moved to engage immediately. Subin launched her fighter wings. 300 strike fighters under her command roared out of the carrier-defiant sky, joined by thousands more from other carriers. The space between the fleets filled with small craft, energy weapons, and missiles. The fighters moved with practiced precision, executing attack runs that Subin had drilled into them during the 3-week journey. The Vrelian fighters were brave but outmatched. The human strike craft had better shields, better weapons, and better coordination. Subin directed her squadrons like a conductor leading an orchestra. Alpha Wing, target their carrier groups. Beta Wing, screen our capital ships from their bombers. Charlie Wing, with me. We're going after their flagship. The battle raged for 3 hours. The human ships used their superior numbers to envelope the Vrelian formation, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The experimental quantum jammers activated, preventing Vrelian ships from jumping away. They were trapped in a battle they couldn't win and couldn't flee. Subin led her fighter group directly at the Vrelian command ship. Their defensive fire was intense, filling space with energy beams and explosive rounds. 2 of her pilots died in the approach, their fighters torn apart by defensive guns. Subin felt each loss like a physical blow, but she couldn't stop. She armed her heavy missiles and locked onto the command ship's bridge section. "All wings, concentrate fire on my target now." Hundreds of missiles converged on the Vrelian flagship. Its shields collapsed under the assault. The missiles punched through the hull and detonated inside. The command ship broke apart, venting atmosphere and bodies into space. Admiral Krelt was on that ship. He died at his post, watching his fleet crumble around him, understanding finally what Rek's arrogance had cost them. With their command structure destroyed and no possibility of retreat, the Vrelian fleet began to surrender. Ship after ship powered down weapons and broadcast surrender codes. Subin ordered ceasefire. She felt sick. Her fighter group had destroyed 16 Vrelian vessels directly. Hundreds of lives ended by her hand. She had known this would happen, had prepared for it, but the reality was harder than she expected. The battle at Vrelios Prime ended with the destruction or surrender of the entire Vrelian home fleet. Of the 15,000 Vrelian warships that had started the battle, fewer than 500 remained combat-capable. The human force had lost 200 ships. The exchange ratio was devastating, and this same scene was playing out across every Vrelian system simultaneously. Lieutenant Taehyung monitored the battle reports from the Eternal Vigil. His strategy was working perfectly. The Vrelians, divided and unable to support each other, were being defeated in detail. Each battle group reported similar results. Overwhelming human numerical superiority, combined with technological advantages, made the outcome inevitable. But one battle was different. At Station Kral, a Vrelian military academy orbiting a gas giant, the human battle group led by Admiral Jiwan herself arrived to find a facility full of young cadets. These were teenagers, students training to be officers. The station's commander broadcast a desperate message that they would not fight, that most of the people aboard were not even old enough to serve in combat. Taehyung advised Admiral Jiwan. "Admiral, the station has minimal weapons. We could destroy it easily, but these are children," Jiwan considered. She had come here for justice, not slaughter. She ordered a different approach. "Broadcast the footage from New Haven. Show them what their military did to our children. Then offer them surrender terms." The human fleet transmitted the complete recording of the New Haven massacre to Station Kral. Every cadet was forced to watch. They saw the Vrelian fleet arrive. They saw the impossible 2-hour evacuation demand. They saw the systematic bombardment of civilian cities. They saw children die. Many of the cadets had been told that New Haven was a military target, that the humans had resisted and forced combat. Now they saw the truth. The station commander surrendered without firing a shot. Half the cadets requested asylum with the human fleet, refusing to serve a military that committed such acts. Station Kral fell without a single casualty. Taehyung noted it in his report. Even in war, humanity could show mercy to those who deserved it. Dr. Yuna's experimental weapons were deployed across the fleet. The Kronos missiles proved devastatingly effective. Vrelian ships hit by them aged to structural failure in seconds. Hulls corroded. Power systems failed from centuries of wear in moments. The ships came apart without explosions, simply crumbling into debris. It was a terrible weapon, and the Vrelians had no defense against it. The neural disruptors caused massive confusion in Vrelian fleet formations. Ships would suddenly lose coordination as their crews became disoriented. In the middle of battle, this was fatal. Human ships would target the confused vessels and destroy them before they could recover. Yuna watched the combat reports and felt growing horror at what her weapons were doing. She had created tools of war that were perhaps too effective, too cruel, but the Vrelians had murdered 2.3 million civilians. She told herself these weapons were necessary. She tried to believe it. The war lasted 7 days. In that week, the human fleet systematically dismantled the Vrelian military. Every major battle ended the same way. Human forces outnumbered and outgunned the Vrelians. The Vrelian High Council assembled in the ruined government complex on Vrelios Prime. The building had been damaged during the battle, with one entire wing collapsed from near-miss orbital fire. They gathered in what remained of their council chamber to formally sign the surrender documents. Ambassador Chaewon represented Earth, flanked by military officers and diplomatic staff. Admiral Jiwan stood behind her, a silent reminder of the fleet still orbiting above. The surrender ceremony was brief and without ceremony. The Vrelian representatives signed each document with shaking hands. There were no speeches, no attempts to salvage dignity. They simply signed away their military power, their territory, and their freedom to act independently. When it was done, Chaewon gathered the documents and spoke the only words of the ceremony. The war is over. Justice will be served. The trials began immediately. Every Vrelian officer identified in the New Haven massacre was transported to Earth to face a military tribunal. This included ship captains, weapons officers, and the commanders who had ordered the bombardment. Vrek was dead, killed in the first strike on the orbital station, but his subordinates would answer for their actions. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy. Humanity wanted everyone to see that this was justice, not revenge. Each officer was provided with legal representation. They were allowed to present their defense. But the evidence was overwhelming. The distress signal from New Haven had recorded everything. The tribunal watched footage of Vrelian ships firing on evacuation vessels full of civilians. They watched Vrelian forces hunting down survivors in underground shelters. They listened to communications where officers acknowledged they were killing non-combatants. Most of the accused claimed they were following orders. The tribunal rejected this defense. Following orders did not excuse genocide. Military officers had a duty to refuse illegal orders. Targeting civilians was a war crime regardless of who gave the command. One by one, the officers were found guilty. Sentences ranged from life imprisonment to execution, depending on the individual's level of responsibility and actions. The galaxy watched these trials with mixed feelings. Some species thought humanity was being too harsh. Others thought they were being too lenient. But everyone agreed that the trials were fair. The accused received proper legal process. The evidence was presented clearly. The judgments were based on law, not emotion. Humanity had shown it could execute justice even against those who had murdered millions of their people. The reparations began flowing from Vrelian worlds to human accounts. For the next 100 years, a portion of Vrelian economic output would go to a fund for the survivors of New Haven and for rebuilding the colony. The amount was calculated to hurt, but not destroy the Vrelian economy. Humanity wanted justice, not the complete impoverishment of an entire species. The 17 border worlds transferred to human control were demilitarized and placed under human administration. Some Vrelian civilians chose to remain on these worlds under human rule. Others left for the Vrelian core systems. Humanity allowed free choice. Those who stayed were surprised to find that human administration was fair and even-handed. Taxes were reasonable. Rights were protected. The humans didn't treat them as conquered subjects, but as residents who needed governance. On New Haven, the construction of the memorial began. Vrelian workers, supervised by human engineers, built a massive structure at the site of the colony's main settlement. The memorial was designed as a wall kilometers long with every single name of the 2.3 million dead carved into the stone. It took 3 years to complete. When it was finished, it became the largest memorial to civilian deaths in galactic history. Captain Minho stood before the wall when it was unveiled. He found his sister's name among the millions. He traced the carved letters with his finger. Around him, other survivors did the same. Families who had escaped on the 3 evacuation ships returned to find the names of those they had lost. It was a place of profound sadness, but also a place of remembrance. The dead would not be forgotten. The righteous fury remained in orbit, its position permanent. Minho aged into the role of guardian of New Haven. He watched as a new colony was established, built carefully around the memorial. The new settlers were volunteers who understood the history of this world. They built farms again, planted the same amber wheat that had grown before. Life returned to New Haven, but it was life that remembered death. Commander Subin struggled with what she had done during the war. Her fighter wing had destroyed hundreds of enemy ships. She had killed thousands of Vrelians personally. She attended mandatory counseling sessions with military psychologists. They told her that she had done her duty, that the Vrelians had forced this war, that her actions were justified. She knew all of this intellectually. Emotionally, it was harder. She continued serving in the military, training the next generation of fighter pilots. She made sure they understood that combat was not glorious, that victory came with costs, that taking a life left scars even when it was necessary. Her pilots learned from someone who had been through real war. They were better prepared for it, but also more reluctant to seek it. That was exactly what Subin wanted. Lieutenant Tae-young, now Admiral Tae-young, found himself uncomfortable with his new fame. At 24, he was the youngest admiral in human history. Military strategists studied his battle plans. Academies taught his tactics. He received requests for interviews and speaking engagements constantly. He declined most of them. He accepted a teaching position at Earth's military academy, where he could pass on his knowledge to future officers who hopefully would never need to use it. In his classes, Taehyung emphasized that his perfect battle plan had still resulted in thousands of deaths. He taught his students that war was a failure of diplomacy, that the best military victory was the one that never had to be fought. His students learned strategy and tactics, but also learned to seek peaceful solutions first. The military needed warriors, but it also needed people who understood when not to fight. Dr. Yuna supervised the sealing of the most dangerous weapons in classified storage facilities. The Kronos missiles, the neural disruptors, and several other experimental systems were locked away with protocols that required authorization from the highest levels of government to access again. She wrote detailed reports on each weapon system, including her recommendations that they never be used except in cases of existential threat to humanity itself. She then shifted her research focus to defensive technologies and humanitarian applications of advanced physics. She had spent years developing ways to kill more efficiently. She wanted to spend the rest of her career finding ways to protect and heal. The military supported this shift. They had seen what her weapons could do. They agreed that such power should be reserved for absolute necessity. The Galactic Council held a special session 6 months after the war ended. Ambassador Chaewon addressed the assembled representatives. She knew that humanity's actions had fundamentally changed galactic politics. The other species needed to understand what happened and why. The Vrelian Dominion attacked New Haven because they believed humanity was weak, Chaewon began. They saw our peaceful colonies and assumed we were easy targets. They did not realize that humanity's peace was a choice, not a necessity. We built our civilization on principles of cooperation and mutual respect. We still believe in those principles. She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 200 species. But we also believe in protecting our own. When the Vrelians murdered 2.3 million civilians, they crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. We responded with overwhelming force, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. We needed to ensure that no other species would make the same mistake. A representative from the peaceful Taurian Republic stood. Ambassador, your fleet of 700,000 warships shocked the entire galaxy. Many of us had no idea humanity possessed such military strength. Why did you hide this from us? We didn't hide it, Chaewon replied. Every ship we built was documented. Every military base was registered with the Galactic Council. We simply never activated our full strength because we never needed to. Humanity prepared for war while hoping for peace. The Vrelians made war necessary. Another representative from the Kresh hegemony asked the question many were thinking. What prevents humanity from using this military power for conquest? You have proven you are the strongest military force in known space. What stops you from building an empire? Chaewon smiled slightly. It was a fair question. What stops us is the same thing that has always guided humanity. We came to the stars to build, not to conquer. We want peaceful neighbors, not subjugated colonies. Our military exists to protect, not to expand. But make no mistake, we will use it again if anyone threatens our civilians. She let that statement hang in the air. Then she continued. Humanity offers the galaxy a choice. Work with us in peace, trade fairly, respect our people, and you will find us to be generous and reliable partners. But attack our civilians, threaten our colonies, test our resolve, and you will face the same response the Vrelians did. The choice is yours. The chamber was silent. Every representative understood the message.